All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Logos Connections Conversations That Matter. Our goal is to build Christian leaders one connection, one conversation at a time. Please follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube. We also tonight want to announce the coming registration for the Healthy Leaders Summit 2.0. You will be able to register at www.thehealthyleaders.com in a couple of days, and we'll keep you posted about that. But we will be having some conversations, some sessions with some great leaders on topics of ministry and mental health and just overall wellness. And actually, one of our panelists for that event will actually be with us in September when we do this Healthy Leaders Summit 2.0. And so we ask you to join us. It will be a great time. But tonight, we are privileged to have four great spokesmen, statesmen, if you will, in ministry, in the marketplace, just for mental health and so many other things. So tonight, we want to introduce these four panelists. We have Reverend Donte Jackson, who is a husband, father, seminary student. He's a preacher. He is from West Virginia. As he states, he's probably the only one from West Virginia that you've ever heard of. But he's currently in Louisville, Kentucky, so I'm not sure which one is worse. So we welcome him tonight. We're glad to have you, my brother. I call him the major prophet, but we'll talk about that another day. So welcome. We also have the scholar himself, Reverend Dr. Quentin Mumphery. He's a strategist, content creator, scholar, preacher. He's a pastor, and he is on the move and doing some incredible things in the sphere of education and in ministry. And certainly, last but not least, my brother from the hometown, who I didn't meet till after I moved to the country, as we used to call it, the licensed clinical practical counselor, Rashad Mills. He's an entrepreneur, he's a motivational speaker, he's a therapist, and he is an up-and-coming minister of the gospel. So again, gentlemen, I want to say thank you for joining us tonight. How are you today?
Exceptional. Thank you for having me.
Honored
Right.
to have you, man. Honored to have you. So I'm excited about this conversation. So let's start. Let's talk about this. So when you guys started in ministry, was there any conversation about mental health? And if not, why do you think that was the case?
I can start. I have been in ministries. I started out young in the 90s. And at that time, I don't even know if I had heard the term mental health.
Wow.
I don't, I mean, anybody who's been around, growing up in the church, I think it's interesting because now that we hear this term mental health and it's very common and popular now, but, you know, I don't think that it was a term then. We talked about spiritual health, right? And we would occasionally talk about physical health. But mental health, that third prong, was not a discussion, right? It was, spiritually, staying fit for Jesus, live right, live holy, live clean, pray, fast, consecrate, read your word, all that kind of stuff. Stay, be spiritually healthy. And if you're around some balanced people, physically healthy, right? Try to take care of yourself. But there was no discussion about mental health that I can recall.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think that not only was there probably was it not a thing, because growing up in that era, I was privileged to grow up in that era personally. Uh, Although I didn't start in ministry until the year 2000, just by virtue of growing up in the church, I think that it probably wasn't a thing because it was stigmatized, specifically to our community. Um, there was just a certain stigma around mental health, and we've all heard it. And by now, it's probably been overstated. But you're crazy if you go and talk to a therapist or see somebody. And it's amazing because most of the people who were telling us we were crazy have probably never been to a therapist themselves. And so again, which is a whole nother bucket of things that we can dump out and talk about on the table. But the reality is that I believe that had they went, our communities, our families, and Lord knows our churches would be in such a healthier mental space, able to grapple with tough subjects. Dr. Mumphery mentioned the 90s. I can vividly remember the 90s at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, right? The church would not touch it, right? And it was so because it was stigmatized. I feel like, again, with that mental health piece, there's a certain stigma that surrounded that more than likely kept the church from addressing it.
In reference to what you just said, one of the things I was interested or fascinated, or intrigued, maybe is a better way to say it, to learn about Dr. King, is that when he was young, he suffered from depression, and they recommended that he get a therapist, but his family did not. His father specifically said, "We won't do that." Because again, he was a part of the elite community of the African Americans in Georgia, so that wasn't the thing to do. So that has been a generational problem.
And the notion, Barry, about just pray through it, and especially now, praise through it. And I think that becomes somewhat problematic, again, and I think that the church and leaders have not done the best job of unpacking those types of serious conversations with a biblical aptitude that would be helpful and is loving, yet gives a firm biblical foundation of some of these tough subjects, such as what we're talking about tonight. And so I think that just by far and in large, I'm thankful that we are where we are now, because we're in a much better space as we move forward in such a unprecedented time where mental health conversation is so necessary.
Before the expert speaks, because I know he has a wealth of wisdom to share, one of the things that has been a great concern for me, because I know it was a problem for me as a young man, and Karl Marx said this decades ago, that religion is the opiate of the masses. And many times we use religion as an excuse, our spiritual expressions as an excuse not to deal with the inner issues. So, Dr. Rashad, forgive me, sir, for interrupting you. I know you're about
No,
to
no, no,
drop.
no. I'm just
Yeah.
listening, taking the information from the brothers who previously spoken. I appreciate that information. I think it was Brother Donte that mentioned the 90s, and I'm going back to the 80s in the church that I was actually raised in, Gillis Memorial, Barry. I don't know if you're familiar
Park
with
Heights.
Park
Yes,
Heights.
sir.
Yeah, Park Heights. And I was raised in that church. And when I have these conversations, I always reflect back to there were moments that between probably ages of 10 and 13, me being in the church, and someone would come in the church, and it was clearly that they were experiencing moments of psychosis. And at that moment, the church wasn't prepared to deal with them, and they had to be escorted out of the church. And as one of the brothers was talking, I think it was Brother Donte, it made me think about, at that time, the church was probably a reflection of the world at a larger view, that many people of color, we didn't know what mental health was. I think it was Dr. Q that mentioned mental health wasn't a thing. I had never heard of mental health in terms of going to see a therapist. I literally didn't hear of that. To be honest with you, I was probably in my late 20s. I didn't even hear about it growing up, because in our community, it wasn't such a thing. And so now I think, and we're working really hard to lower that stigma of what mental health is. But I think in large part, we're really learning what mental health is. We're learning what mental wellness is. We're learning the difference between mental health and wellness. We're having a greater understanding of what it looks like to get connected to a therapist, what that actually looks like. Because I think a lot of us, and this is not really a fault of us as people of color, we just haven't been exposed to it. We don't even know what a session with the therapist begins to look like. Well, what do I do? Do I just like start telling them my information? Do this an intake? We don't even understand what that process has looked like. So now we're kind of gravitating towards it a lot more. But I mean, again, no fault of ours. We're just simply behind the times, or we were behind the times. We're gradually closing the gap and understanding that therapy is real, it's accessible, the benefits of therapy. But I mean, for the longest period of time, we weren't exposed to it, because that word mental health, it wasn't in our vocabulary.
That's
And I think
true.
one thing that is important that Dr. Mills mentioned, when we say mental health, people assume it's only limited to therapy, right? That anything that's related to mental health, mental well-being, I think, you mentioned a great point earlier about Dr. King. Several of his biographers really theorize and believe that he struggled with depression his whole life. And even I mean, from Taylor Branch, who wrote the trilogy about the civil rights movement years ago, and several biographers talk about his depression. And that's well documented. But even when you look at some of his old pictures and videos, there's a sadness and a kind of sullen disposition that he has, especially when you look at the mountaintop speech, the very last one, what we know as the mountaintop speech, rather, as he kind of looks off. Then there was even I don't know if that was the one where Mahalia Jackson, no, one of the ones where Mahalia Jackson was behind him and she started singing to encourage him. But there was a way that reflects the way the Black church in particular has looked at it, because everything related to mental health or well-being was equated to therapy. That's the extent of it. I think things like self-care weren't even a concept, because in the church, many of us grew up in the kind of church framework and the Christian theology of, deny yourself, right? Take no thought for the life, take no thought for the morrow, right? And so the notion of self-care almost felt carnal and unspiritual.
That's true. And I think about, to be honest with you, I didn't hear about self-care till I got in seminary. And that was in 2016. And then the notion of pastors taking sabbaticals was like foreign to me. Like, so, I mean, pastors took vacations when I was growing up, but a sabbatical, a pastor, that was like foreign to me. And so this whole idea of self-care really is something new to me. So I understand. It's only been the last decade or so that I learned about it. I want to ask Dr. Mills something. As a therapist, have you seen an uptick in Christian leaders coming to therapy?
Without question.
Okay.
I mean, without question. So I think it was, and I don't have the statistics to back this up, but I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, there was this unhealthy, I won't say a trend, but it was quite a few pastors actually unliving themselves as a result of several things. And it was just like this phenomenon, right? I think in one year it was about 5 to 10, and these were sort of more notable, if you will, pastors. And as a result of that, I think that pastors and leaders and just people in any kind of leadership in the church, they are becoming more aware that, you know what, I can have Jesus and I can also have a therapist. That's like my running joke, man. You can have Jesus and you can have a therapist. And I think people understand that they can be like this and they don't have to be like this. And in order to be effective, I do think that they should be merging as opposed to operating in this direction. And as a result of that, I see quite a few here in Baltimore leaders that are coming to therapy, and they understand the value of therapy. It doesn't take away from who they are, it doesn't take away from their relationship with Christ, it doesn't take away from their duties, their responsibilities. It's just an additional enhancement to kind of make them better. And I think Dr. Q mentioned it, that you can praise your way through it. Like, we have to understand that you can't praise your way just through depression or anxiety. There's some things that a therapist can provide tips, tools, strategies, and even if we want to go as far as psychotropic medications, like all of these things are enhancements to what's already there foundationally, your relationship with Christ. So we're seeing that a lot more. To give you a quick example, there was a brother that is the pastor of United Methodist Church here in the state of Maryland, and he called me the other night, almost like in a frantic like text. And I'm, been doing therapy long enough that I can kind of read messaging through text from some of my clients. He says, "Man, I need to get in the session." And this is a client that I'm no longer, because of his insurance change, I'm no longer seeing him through that way. So he says, "Man, I'll pay you whatever your rate is." So we got a session in 24 hours, and he literally said, "Man, the challenges of being a husband, a father, a ministry leader, a business owner, it literally caused him to go to a hotel, told his wife suggested, I suggest you spend a weekend in a hotel to just have some time for yourself." And one of his major concerns is, "Man, I'm in this hotel and I still have to get this sermon together for Sunday." And sort of some of the challenges and the pressures So I mean, it's a lot, and it's just so vitally important that ministry leaders and anybody involved in ministry, that you are actively involved in it. And my pastor, Dr. Reginald Thomas, shared something with me not too long ago. He said people that do the work of soul care often struggle with self care, and I thought that was really profound.
Wow. Say it again. That was good.
Yeah, people that do the work of soul care often struggle with self care.
Wow. 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 So let me ask these two great prognosticators of the gospel. So tell me, how did the two of you evolve to the place where you knew that mental health was a necessary discussion, but also evolved to the place where you became proactive about your own mental health?
Well, for me, knowing that it was a necessary discussion, actually came from the community at large. I think in my life and ministry, one of the things that, well, I could go back to even my ordination. One of the pastors there told me to keep my keep my mind in God's word with an eye on the newspaper. In essence, he was essentially saying, be mindful of what's going on in the community around you, because these are the people that you're going to have to serve and minister to. And it's difficult to minister and be out of touch. And so I knew that it was necessary as those conversations sort of to swell in other circles, and even knew the importance of it myself. I got called to my first church when I was 29 years old. It was in 2010. And while there were a lot of things going on, and, first pastorate, a lot of things that I did not know, one of the things that I wanted to be sensitive to is just making sure that I was adequately meeting the needs of those around me. And one of those ways just came by trying to integrate therapy and have those sorts of sessions. There was a organization named Prestera that was directly behind our church, that served a population that was a little bit different than a demographic that attended our church. But we still wanted to partner with them in helping to serve those who may come to our church and still need those services. I think evolving to knowing that I personally needed to connect in that space, wrestling with what a friend of mine, Dr. Lewis Brogdon, in his book Dying to Live, he talks about, which is a book centered around clergy suicide, but initially he's talking about what leads up to that. And one of the things that he lists is the burnout and the isolation. And those sorts of things can lead to a multitude of behaviors. And so while praying, because here's the bridge for me, while praying, I said, God, I know that there's a certain type of leader that I cannot afford to be. In an effort for me to not be that, God, I need some different kind of help. Friends are good, and socialization is good. I think that's one of the things that I also had to learn later on in my ministry is socialization. Not allowing the ministry to take me away from my friends. And I'm not just talking about my preaching friends. I'm talking about, all kind of friends that may not, they may not necessarily preach, but they're good people. And they help you to recognize that you're still a human, and putting the humanity back into my life, I realized that, and a therapist actually helped me to see that. And so that was part of it for me, is just looking at kind of where I was in ministry and some of the things that I was dealing with, be it, in my family, personally, professionally, and, just wanted a space to unpack.
I think for me, it was a process and a few different layers. I personally started going to therapy initially years ago as I was going through a divorce. Um, and so my first experience with therapy was probably about 12 or 13 years ago, during that season of my life. And then I became a proponent of it. I think where I picked up some of the other pieces, as I was planting the church, again, you mentioned earlier me working in education, and I was traveling for my work and also planting a church, right? So not only working full time outside the church, but also having a full time travel role and planting a church. And so the toll that was taking, I mean, I didn't even realize it because I grew up in a mega church, right? And so part of mega church culture is you grind, you work, you show up, right? It is this, it becomes performative in some ways. Not that it's not genuine, but it is this, lights, camera, action. When the curtain is up, the show goes on, regardless, and we even said things in the church like, you know what, you preach like you crazy and confuse the people and the devil, and don't nobody know that what's going on, and you cry afterwards, right? You can cry and lose your mind afterwards, after church, but when it's on, you preach like you done lost your mind, and and so that kind of thing kind of creates this mindset in you that almost, you mentioned, Pastor Jackson mentioned, you forget the human side of you, right? So you need those friends who aren't preachers. But part of the problem is when you are in ministry full time, you're surrounded by a bunch of preachers. You need those friends who may not be where you at in Jesus, but they good people because they see stuff that you might be blind to. Because you get in this echo chamber of ministry, and you need people who can see your humanity in ways that you don't always see it. And so I think that I was blind to some of that, and I'm just going and going. I was actually two conversations I had with pastor friends of mine. Helped one pastor who's an older pastor, and he at that time had probably been pastoring for about 35, 40 years. And had pastored a thriving ministry, and we're sitting at lunch, and he's talking about, just asked me, how the work was going with ministry and how just my life was going and everything, and just asked about some of my life rhythms. He said, "You have a lot going on. When do you rest?" And so, me, oh, I don't. It's just a grind. He looked at me in my face. He said, "If you don't change that, then you will die." Just like that. And I'm like, who do you think he's talking to? So, I'm Pentecostal, right? So I cancel those words. The devil is a liar. So I'm going. And another pastor friend of mine was at lunch during his time, and he had some very similar conversations. He asked me about rest. I said, I don't. He said, "Wow, you're holier than God." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Even God rested. It says on the seventh day he rested. So if you don't need rest, you got to be holier than God." And so those two conversations made me take a step back and be like, I need to look at this. Other thing that I had, some of my white pastor friends that I began to look at some of their patterns. One of y'all mentioned sabbaticals, right? Not just vacations, but actually sabbaticals. I had one pastor friend who pastored, fairly large multi-campus church. Every year, he took a 6-week sabbatical in the summer, and there was a regular rhythm, right? But it was healthy. And so as I started noticing some of these pastors that I saw were taking sabbaticals, that wasn't a concept in the black church for the most part, right? Because black preachers always scared. Well, if I'm away more than 2 weeks, somebody gonna split my church, or the offering's gonna go down, right? Or the people not gonna come. It's all these things, right? Because we have built this culture that everything hinges on the shoulders of the leaders, which leads to this stress and pressure and anxiety. Because now, if I don't show up on a Sunday, offering's going to be down. We're not going to pay the rent or the mortgage, and all this. It becomes this trickle down thing. And if you have a larger church with staff, well, how are we going to pay the staff? Because if I'm not there, because now everything's about me. Um, And so looking at those things, I'm like, there's got to be another way here. And then I think the other thing that happened for me was just some life circumstances, grief and loss. Brother Barry, you remember, a few years ago, went through some tragic loss. One of my armor bearers and one of my nephews both got killed on the same day, and I had to officiate both funerals. And my armor bearer's funeral was on my birthday. Um, and so, I'm trying to stuff my grief, shepherd both my church and my family, and get through this logistical side of preaching these two services that are both difficult. Two young black men who both died violently, they both killed, right? So there's that side of it. My nephew is just at his early 20s, at the beginning of his life. My arm bear's in his early 30s, leaves behind a wife and children. And so there's like this, so you're reconciling all these realities, right? And then 2 years ago in 2023, went through another series of deaths and losses in my family. So for me, it was of necessity
Yeah.
that I was in a place where if I don't look out for me, because I remember, Dr. Mills mentioned that series, I think it was probably 2018, 2019, we saw this series, this rash of clergy suicides and then some deaths. There were several brothers who were like, around our age or younger, who just dropped dead. I remember one brother, I forget what state he was in. And he was in his 30s, pastor with wife and kids, just dropped dead in his driveway one day leaving the house, right? And so there was this rash of just sudden deaths, and then you saw the rash of clergy suicides. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be something here. And so for me, it was a matter of survival, that if I'm going to last, not just in ministry, but in life, period. Because a lot of times we think this is for ministry. But at the end of the day, if you retire or if you stop pastoring or anything can happen, right? Many you go through a transition ministry, or people leave your ministry, right? And we've all experienced those kind of transitions. You got to take care of you, and a lot of times we make sacrifices in the name of ministry, in the name of the kingdom, but we don't always do things for ourselves to preserve ourselves because, and I remember years ago, someone gave the analogy, which we've all heard it, that, when you're on an airplane, the first thing they tell you is, in case of an emergency, and the mask comes down, secure your own mask before you help anyone else put theirs on. Because my approach was always help everybody else put their mask on, and then I'm gasping for air. And so for me, a lot of it was born of necessity and some very hard conversations with some people who cared enough about me to tell me the truth.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff.
And I just wanted to tag along on the end of what Quentin said, because that is so major. Unlearning how to stop helping everybody else first. I mean, that I cannot tell you how difficult, especially, I got it from my father. My father's a pastor. And so my father was a bivocational pastor at that. And so to see the way that, he just operated, that was my blueprint. That was my paradigm. And I saw that. And now looking at it, the way that I'm looking at it now, I'm just like, there's no way that's sustainable. And I think about, how much alike we are, but how different we are, could be by virtue of the times in which we lead. But the reality is that I did learn it from something. And I think we have to talk about that as well. The unlearning and the stripping away of all of these generational things that, we wear as badges of honor and, and valor, but it's killing us, man. It's killing some of us physically, literally, and some of us spiritually. And so, we need to you know, just unpack that and begin the process of healing and allow the healing to flow through our unlearning as well.
Dr. Mills, talk to us.
Let me just piggyback on what Pastor Jackson said, man. I think that was an incredible point. You talk about the unlearning. And let's think of this from the perspective of you talk about the models that we have seen, right? The models that we've seen in ministry. And I'm just going to make this somewhat for a moment here, just like gender. So as men, we have been indoctrinated with this false belief that, man, we got to grind, we got to grind, we got to grind. And I think that that's one of the most detrimental words to men over the last 5 to 10 years. I really do, man. We got to grind. We got to grind. And it was a brother, and I don't know who it was, and I wish I could remember the name so I can give him his proper credit. He said, Rashad, think about what grinding is. It's just the rubbing of something, and eventually it's nothing because you've grinded and grinded and rubbed. So it's nothing there. And that's what grinding has done to us. And when you watch people, Pastor Jackson talked about his father, just pouring, pouring and pouring and pouring. Do you know how many nights probably your dad went home and he probably was saying, Dad, man, I wish somebody was pouring into me. But that was probably a belief that he had, somebody had placed in him. And then let's think about this from the perspective of our relationship with Christ. Man, Christ wants me to just, I'm doing it. I'm doing the Lord's work. I'm doing the Lord's work. And, I think Dr. Q said it earlier, man, you're holier than thou. God rested. So we have to be okay with resting, because I think when we rest, then we can be the best and healthiest version of ourselves when we pour into the multitude of people that we encounter. And again, for people that do the work that, got two pastors on the line, you're in ministry. I'm sort of getting my feet wet in ministry. There's always going to be a need for people. There's always going to be a need. So there's never not going to be a time where we aren't called, and there's people that need us, whatever our respective gifts may be. But then we also have to say, man, if I continually pour and pour and pour, that need is going to be there, but Rashad might not be there to fulfill that need because I haven't taken care of myself. And I encourage my clients to do it, and I'm very aware of it now. Man, I'm intentional about taking time. Like, I will put days on the calendar. Rashad is not doing anything. And I'm intentional about that, because if not, Rashad is grinding and grinding, and Rashad is not there. And like the people who need me, I'm not even there to properly service them because, I've just grinded.
Wow. Wow. So I'm going to ask a question that some people may find this sacrilegious when I ask this question. But to be honest with you, if I can be very transparent, there have been moments where I found ministry itself traumatic. And I think people don't really consider how traumatic ministry is. And let me give you an example. Um, it is the call of God for us to be present for other people. But how do you manage that moment when you're being present for other people and you're seeing the results, but you feel like God is not present for you?
I think this is a whew,
We manage, good Lord.
listen, right? This is so I think two things, a couple things on this one. One, that I just went through a transition with ministry, transitioning out of, physical Sunday worship, right? And a friend of mine asked me recently, how does it feel? It's been a couple of months now. How does it feel? And I said, actually a friend of mine who's a pastor asked me, how does it feel, man? Because I'm in this thing. And I said, you know what? Part of me wants to feel guilty for saying this, but it feels amazing. I said, I did not realize how much tension my body has stored. There's this book called The Body Keeps the Score, about the impacts of trauma on the body. And I said to him, I said, I realized I tensed up physically every Saturday night because I was anticipating Sunday morning, right? Now, for a few years, I travel again. I travel a lot. And so there were many weekends where I'm flying back on Saturday from work, and I would leave the airport, go to the church, and anoint the sanctuary with oil. I'm Pentecostal, we got to have the oil, right? So I would go and anoint the oil on my way home from the airport on a Saturday night and just pray through. But Saturday night, you're also anticipating Sunday morning. Is my message right? are people going to show up, right? And then, on Sunday morning, every pastor been there, you get those texts. Oh, pastor, I ain't going to be there. My dog threw up and I got to clean the vomit up, or, I got to roast in the oven or anything, right? I'm not going to be there today, right? We on vacation, all those kind of things, right? And so between Saturday night and Sunday afternoon, and then on Sunday afternoon, there's like this lifting off your shoulders because it's over now. But then, depending on what kind of Sunday it was, that could be a whole other thing, because you have your Sunday. Every pastor's been there. You have some Sundays where you leave questioning, God, am I really called to this? You driving off in tears because you're like, God, I don't. Especially if you've planted or anything, you're like, God, I don't know. Um, and so I think there's a weight that sits on you and the trauma of it. The other thing is this: we talk about church hurt, but the conversations we hear about church hurt are all from the perspective of the sheep and not from the shepherd. I remember an old preacher told me many years ago, is sheep bite and sheep got teeth. We hear church hurt from the standpoint of the shepherd, from the sheep, but we never hear about church hurt from the standpoint of the shepherd, because most pastors, we never tell our side of the story, right? Because we think it's spiritual. I'm not going to put folk out there like that. I'm not going to say what was done to me, because we're trying to embody the sufferings of Christ. But one thing that someone said that really struck me is that when Jesus talked about false prophets, he talked about wolves not in shepherd's clothing, but wolves in sheep's clothing. And we always talk about it as if that the falsehood is always coming from the pulpit. But Jesus never said that there would be wolves in shepherd's clothing. He said that there would be wolves in sheep's clothing, because many times the trauma is not coming from the pulpit, it's coming from the pew.
I mean, what you want me to say? Wow. Wow. Yeah,
Dr. Q, man, you just dropped the mic. We can have benediction. This is done.
exactly. I'm like, what do you want me to say?
I'm Baptist. May the Lord watch.
Service is over now.
Wow. Wow. I mean, it is a two-edged sword, really it is. Wow. So let me ask this question. As ministers, because all of you are ministers, how do you encourage other ministers or other ministry leaders to preserve their mental health in the midst of these kinds of situations?
I think my experience has been, and once again, I have to give credit to my father as my blueprint, because I never saw him put undue pressure on people to perform, in a sense that if he knew that there was something that you were experiencing, some hardship, some trial, what have you, that will cause you to be away, he covered you, which is what I think that any real pastor who's worth his or her salt would do. However, I found myself doing just that. I knew that, one day, this is going back a ways, but, some days, my musician wouldn't be there, and I knew that where he wasn't praying, he was enjoying his family. He was, things that we don't really talk about in the church, enjoying your family. And he, there would be times where, just things like that and different aspects of, people go on vacations, people do things, and you never know what that's doing for them. And if I can just pause right there, I think that sometimes, and not to push back too much on what Quentin said about the wolves in sheep's clothing, but I believe there is some toxic traits that we have as leaders that we do sometimes. We push too much for the goals of the ministry, not realizing that without some of these faithful people, there would be no ministry. and you know, I think encouraging them to not do to themselves what sometimes we do to ourselves. And that is, you know, we understand that the church, we're called to the church. We're called to serve the people. And so a lot of times, you know, especially in lead pastoral situations, we shoulder a lot. We shoulder a lot more than what people know. And most of it, to your point, Pastor Mumphery, we don't talk about. But the reality is that we shouldn't put that burden on other people. And my way, again, of just releasing people to preserve their mental health is, you know, keeping an open dialogue with them, communicating on a real level, not on a what I need from them level, not on a what they're paid to do level. But, you know, I realize if I can have open, honest dialogue with you and you with me, then that alone releases tension, right? If I can remove certain barriers where you see me as way up here and you down here, and every time you have to talk to me, it's a burden instead of a blessing. You know, I want to remove all of that stuff, and then I want to, you know, address people as people. And then I think, secondly, I want to make sure that they are doing the things, that their family is good, that they are good, that the things concerning them are good. And then lastly, I just want to make sure that they're in a good spiritual place. You know, I want to be open to pray for them and remind them that they don't have to worry about hearing it again. that I'm not going to expose them, but in truest sense, I want to be a brother born for the day of adversity. I want to be that brother that is there for them, that's walking through life with them, that enables them to take those shackles off of their mind, whatever they may be, and allow them to come into that space and be free.
I think for me, gentlemen, it would just be the validation of one's emotions, what they're experiencing at that time, right? I think it's very important for the mental health space to just validate what people are experiencing. And sometimes the validation for me is just simply listening, right?
Yeah.
To listening to, you know, a brother and sister, you know, in ministry, they may have some concerns and not offering anything. And I know at some point I used to be guilty of this myself, that, you know, I would be quick to jump in. Let me pray for you. Sometimes people don't, it's not, Rashad, I don't need you to pray for me, bro. I just need you to listen. I'm telling you about what I'm going through. You know, my wife left me and I need you to listen. That is validating to that person at that moment. And it doesn't always require us to, you know, throw out this readily available scripture or pray. Those things are great, obviously, but sometimes it's just, people just need to know that somebody is listening to what they are experiencing, as opposed to going into, you know, kind of typical cliche kind of Christian stuff that we all jump into. Man, I'm gonna pray for you, man, sometimes. And I know from my own personal experience, right? Some of the people in the church that have helped me the most, it's been listening. It's not been offering, hey, Rashad, you should go left and or right, or well, you know what it says in 2 Timothy. No, man, it's like being real at that moment, and part of that realness is just listening.
I agree. I agree. I think as you were talking, one of the things I was thinking about is that what we have to be cautious of, depending upon your church context, we have to be careful not to minimize or demonize people's emotions and give them the place to feel. So in your more charismatic Pentecostal settings, your emotions may be demonized because, they may say, that's the devil. Well, no, I'm having a bad day. I'm going through a rough spot. In your more conservative context, your more Methodist Baptist context, they may minimize your emotions and say things like toughen up, you know, or, you're just being soft, you're just too sensitive. And so I think we have to give people the space to feel. But I think part of that as church leaders, when you dehumanize yourself by making yourself a workhorse, you become insensitive to others. So I think we have to be cautious of that.
And I was going to ask Elder Elliott, can we have Dr. Mills to kind of speak to that? Just because I feel like that is very helpful what you said, Elder, and giving people the space to feel. What's the framework around that, Dr. Mills?
That's a great question. So I always tell people what you feel is your experience, your emotions, your feelings. They are real to you. I always thought that they are real to you because if they are real to you, then you can feel that this is real to me. It's validated. I feel this, and no one else has to actually feel this, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And I do this with adult clients. I actually tell people to tell me what do you feel? And I tell people you have the right to go from A to Z. It's non-judgmental. What do you feel? Whatever they come to therapy for, or just in life, even outside of a therapeutic space, man, what do you feel right now? And I've heard some really interesting things, but it's helped people because it's validated what they feel and not anyone else actually feeling. And Barry, you made an incredible point that sometimes that happens where in a lot of spaces, church spaces, there's been a minimizing of what someone feels. And when I minimize what somebody feels, now what have I done? I basically invalidated their experience. Your experience is your experience. And to people that may have more challenging feelings at a moment, it might be challenging to us. We might not understand it, but that's their feelings. Now, because they're having the feelings doesn't make it right or wrong. No, that's just what they're feeling. Right? And hopefully that makes a lot of sense. And I just tell people, hey, tell me what you feel. For younger clients that I have, man, I'll bring out like the feelings wheel. If they can't identify, with feelings. All right, hey, we got red, blue. What do you feel? And they'll pick a feeling. Sometimes with adults, I'll do a different version of it, man. What do you feel? And for guys, it's interesting because a lot of adult males, they only identify with what? Sad or happy, and they can't find any feelings in between. And so it's like this educational process, but I will validate whatever a client feels at that moment. Man, I understand that you feel this way. Now, if the feelings aren't matching up to something that we're talking about or we're working through, I'll validate the feelings, but I'll shift to say, okay, how can we think about this in a healthier perspective? Maybe those feelings of anger that you have, they're certainly valid at that moment, but however, we don't want to act on these feelings of anger and try to help them along those ways. But I'm always going to validate. I'm always going to validate because that's a person's internal experience. Bigger picture thinking, if I don't validate somebody's experience, I can be the reason that somebody doesn't continue their therapeutic journey. Man, I had this one therapist, Rashad Mills. He told me that I shouldn't be mad, and then they're never coming back to therapy again because I didn't validate what their experience was at the time. So just validating, allowing them to know that. And let's think about it. And let's think about this from the perspective as all Black males on this line. What if we, as a society, we start telling our younger kids, particularly younger Black males from the time that they are born, man, you have a right to feel this way. Do you know how our culture shifts? Do you know how we're going to respond to different things? Literally, you know how we're gonna respond to things at 18 and 25 and 30 and 35 in a drastically different manner because somebody validated a feeling when we were 5. Man, it's all right, Donte, that you were crying. I understand why you were crying. Barry, sorry, I understand that you were mad. That's why you threw the pencil. But now let's find a healthy way. Man, my life would be different if I was if I had those experiences. So I'm kind of going on, but yes, that's kind of my thought on validating and giving someone the framework to allow their experiences to the feelings to be valid.
But we were taught to be numb, boys. We were taught to be numb, in particular in our age bracket. And because we are numb to our own emotions, or because I think we're evolving, some of us, but because we are or have been in times past numb to our own emotions, has made us indifferent to the emotions of those around us. Indifferent and insensitive. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I think Quentin was going to say something.
Yeah, I think one thing that came as Rashad was talking, I think that the power of validating that, especially for younger people, is you free them from this yoke of shame. So
Mm,
part of the
Yeah,
reason we don't express emotion is shame.
shame.
I don't say how I feel because at some point, as you gave Rashad gave the example that, as a therapist, you don't want people to feel like, oh, well, they invalidated, they shut down this what I was feeling. At some point, many of us were made to feel some degree of shame. And in the church context, if what you felt was not spiritual, right? If you're angry, right? Well, I think in the church, especially in the Black church, we have this adverse concept of anger that anytime you feel anger, it's ungodly. Well, the scripture says be angry and sin not. Some stuff should make you angry, right? And so I think we sometimes have this fear of deep emotion. And
mm,
I think that there comes a shame with that. And so, but if we teach people, especially younger folks, especially our young Black men, to own and articulate what you feel. Now we can talk about how you navigate through what you feel, but let's give you space to say this is what I'm feeling right now. Whether it's anger, whether it's sadness, or stuff you may not know how to articulate. But I think this thing about shame is an epidemic in a lot of ways because we are made to feel shame over simply feelings and things like that. And the scripture talks about Jesus enduring the cross, but despising the shame. We need to do things to break this shame barrier.
mm.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that was helpful to me in that realm, and I know we're talking you. I blame you, Dr. Mills, and you, Pastor Quentin, for bringing this up. But when we talk about that shame piece, and then talking about as children, one of the things that it brought me immediately back to was my father teaching me that it's all right to cry. Is something that um, I saw him do in times of um, disappointment, but also he was there to walk me through my own disappointment. And I have an 8-year-old son who's back in the back playing with his VR headset right now. I thought he was coming through the wall a second ago, but he's not, thank God. But I I have to help him navigate from this space of now awareness, right? Because my eyes have been open and I can't put on him the demands of growing up like I grew up, knowing that, maybe I didn't want my boys to see me cry. So I didn't. I want to be made fun of. I want to be told I was no punk, right? Now, again, that's language from a different era. We don't use that language anymore. But the reality is that, it's still here with us and embedded within us. I think is, again, somebody mentioned breaking that cycle. I think it may have been Pastor Quentin, just breaking that cycle of all of that that is in us in order to move, to Dr. Mills' point, to a more healthy place of learning how to get to a point and place of healing.
That's good. That's good. I'm gonna start with Dr. Mills, and you guys can go from there. But this is I think my last question. And that question is, why is it important in this 21st century context, important for us to have emotionally intelligent ministers and ministry?
Wow, that's a great question. I think it's important, number one, emotional intelligence breeds a certain level of self-awareness. So if I am self-aware, then I can govern my own emotions, I can govern my own self-care, and I am really aware of what taking care of myself looks like. So in turn, that I can be more aware to the needs of the people that I'm actually serving. I can be more in tune to their mental health needs, in addition to already being in tune with their spiritual health needs, right? And this level of awareness just means that you are the healthiest version of yourself as a leader, and the leader in the church setting, but also the healthiest version of yourself, obviously, even before church. Your first ministry is your home, inside of your home, and you can teach certain things that Pastor Jackson just talked about. So I just think emotionally intelligent men provide a healthier society at large. They contribute, I'll say, to a healthier society at large.
Good stuff.
I was just gonna offer that um, Pete Cesaro says in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, he says that it's impossible to be spiritually mature yet emotionally immature. And so I think that lodged within that is ensuring ourselves that we are addressing and learning how to name again what we feel, and living in that brokenness, knowing that Christ heals it, and that vulnerability, that space of being vulnerable is okay, because that's, I believe, the space. I believe the Apostle Paul wrote that when I'm weak, then I'm strong. Is when I realize that there's no way that I can do this on my own. And I realize there's somebody else who has to help me do it.
Yeah.
I would just echo what both of these brothers have said. And I think leading in love involves that. Dante mentioned earlier about, making sure that the people who serve with you and under you know that you care, right? I think one of the dangers of this thing about self-preservation and self-care is we can swing the pendulum in a whole opposite direction, and that we're so afraid of getting burned out that it's like, I don't care what happen to none of y'all. I'm just gonna make sure I'm okay, right? So, but the scripture says in Proverbs 18 that a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. And I think we have to also be careful and make sure that we are striking this kind of balance of, the scripture says we love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We got to love both, right? We want to love God well. We want to love ourselves well. We want to love other people well. And to the extent that we are aware of those things, we can do that in a more effective way. We model healthy behaviors. And I think Pete Scazzero's book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, is something that every leader, every Christian really, but especially if you're in leadership, needs to. You need to be emotionally intelligent and emotionally healthy. And it's hard to be emotionally intelligent if you're not emotionally healthy, because a lot of stuff that we deem as spiritual is really emotional. That's a whole other conversation. But I think that, but the more where you are emotionally, the healthier you are spiritually, and you're able to navigate that well for yourself, and it impacts how you navigate it with and for other people.
Awesome. So while you're talking, do me a favor, tell our viewers how they can find you, and also just give them a 30-second blurb of your thoughts on mental health and ministry, whatever you want to share.
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram at the only Q Mumphery. And then on Facebook, just my name. Yeah, so Facebook, Instagram, you can follow me, find me there. Just last thoughts, I think mental health. I'm glad this, June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. This is probably the first year that I've heard it talked about this much. I'm glad this has become a thing now, particularly for men. I was reading some statistics that were very sobering recently about the rate of men's suicide. And I have a soft spot for that because I have men who have been close to me who have taken their own lives, unfortunately. And so I'm glad that this is a conversation now. I will say this, particularly to men, everyone, but particularly to men, because men, we have a habit of isolating more than women do naturally. Um, you mentioned things that will help you be healthy. I think one of those things is community. Don't do life and do ministry alone. Whether you're single or married, you need a healthy community as a man, especially of other brothers, that you can connect to, that you can talk to. Don't do it alone, but also learn yourself well, know your triggers, and build some rhythms in your life. Have a life outside of the church, if you're in ministry, and have some hobbies, right, that don't involve anything spiritual. If and get some physical hobbies, because a lot of times, we think of hobbies as I'm gonna play a video. No, don't do sedentary hobbies. Get a hobby that requires you to move, because physical health impacts your mental health. That's a whole other thing. So that's what I would say. And take a vacation.
Yes, sir. Reverend Donte, talk to us, sir. Your final words and how people can reach out to you, contact you, engage you for preaching or singing. This joker can sing, just so y'all know. This joker can sing. But anyway, go ahead.
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. Donte L Jackson, pretty much everywhere. Give me a follow. I may have to delete a few folks before I can follow back, but I got you. I got you. I I I think that if I could say anything in these closing thoughts is to Pastor Quentin's point about it being Men's Mental Health Month. Do not allow the enemy to make you think that being vulnerable is being weak. When I went through well, before I went through my divorce, I lost a church. In the process of navigating that space between, which is I worked out in therapy, which was navigating loss, because it was like I was doing a constant series of funerals, but it was a funeral of my personal life, and I didn't even put the two together, and so I had to learn to navigate that season of loss and grieve it.
Wow.
I had to learn to grieve it, and the part of that grieving process was learning to not try to run with a narrative, but be vulnerable. You may not be a person to volunteer all your business, but don't lie about it either. Tell the truth, be vulnerable, be open, but most of all, embrace that space of healing and walk through it. Give yourself grace, but by all means, keep moving forward.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, the great one himself. Talk to us,
Man, I
sir.
like the way you speak. I'm gonna have to hire you as my agent, man. When I become big time one day, I'm gonna have you as my agent. Number one, Brother Barry, I want to just give you some flowers, man. Just the thoughtfulness and the vision to have this together, and also Pastor Mumphery and then Pastor Jackson as well. It's always wonderful to share with like-minded brothers that love the Lord and understand the value of mental health as well. So I wanted to start there. So I'm Rashad Bowtie Mills on all forms of social media. I think on Instagram it's Rashad Bowtie Mills _ 1914, which is the wondrous band of 5 made the same fraternity. And Brother Jackson, I will be praying for you. I'm still going to be praying for you that you now can come on home. But on a serious note, this is what I would just say. I'll offer 3 words: Jesus in therapy. I think that people can have both, and there's a need in today's space to have both. And then I wanted to offer the following numbers. 988 is a suicide hotline. 988. So for anybody watching, anybody who listens to this live will have access to it via the replay. 988 is very important. There's someone there. It's always someone there 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365. They can connect with someone and help them navigate whatever stresses or challenges that they may have. And then it's also one that I learned recently. An individual can actually text hello, HELLO, to 741-741. So that's a crisis text line. So they can text hello to 741-741 to connect with the counselor. So Just wanted to throw those resources out there for anyone that may need them. And if you don't need them, you can always, you can always share them with someone else.
Awesome. Awesome. And Donte, you said you have another one?
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing, and I promise I'm gonna be out y'all's way. I feel in my heart, if I don't do this, it's just not right. I talked a piece about my past, but I gotta talk about my present. I want to thank God publicly for my wife, who, after I experienced a divorce, I got remarried. Miranda, if you are watching, baby, thank God for you. You know
Wow.
what you played in my life and how you prayed me through, let me feel, but then told me that I got to get up and do some work. And so thank you, baby. Oh, and by the way, she's formerly known as Miranda Sanders. I changed that last name. She was in Baltimore doing a choir thing, but Miranda Jackson, love you, baby. All right, I'm done.
Any other last words? I don't want to cut any of the brothers off. I want to say thank you to your brothers for being a part of this, but also personally for being a part of my life. You are brothers that I trust spiritually and naturally. You're honorable men of God. Donte has called me on several occasions, which is why I call him the major prophet. And this joker prays fire from heaven. Uh, he's baby Elijah. He prays fire from heaven. And I'm sure, Pastor Mumphery, I probably blow your Instagram inbox up. Um, blow it up. And then Rashad, man, periodically, I want to say at least once a month, he texts me just to say, how you doing mentally? What's going on with you? How you doing? So I appreciate that because one of the challenges of being in ministry is that you're visible, but you're often unseen.
Mm.
And so I want to say thank you for seeing me and feeling me. And I'm just grateful. I appreciate you, brothers. And again, I want you to know I don't take you for granted. I celebrate you. I honor you. And I'm believing God for great things for each of you. Whatever it is God is calling you to do in ministry or in marketplace, because I believe all three of you are ambidextrous in your call. So you're called to do more than one thing. So I celebrate what you're called to do, the lives you're going to impact, and the people that are called to your voice. My brother Tim Wortham always says that somebody has each of our voice has an audience. And so I'm believing God for your voice, your audiences finding your voice, and vice versa. So again, we want to invite you. Again, thank you, my brothers. Thank you to our listeners for watching this episode of the Logos Connection Conversation That Matters. Again, we want to invite you to Charlotte, North Carolina for the Healthy Leaders Summit 2.0 from September 12th through the 13th. We have some tremendous voices that are going to share with us. We have Dr. Alan G. Porter. We have Dr. Peter Weary, Dr. Karen Stallings. We have this brother, licensed clinical practical counselor, professional counselor rather, Rashad Mills, and so many others. So we're going to invite you to come. And again, there's going to be more information forthcoming about this event. And you can go to www.thehealthyleaders.com and the registration will be opening shortly. And also, early registration ends on August 12th. So we want you to take advantage of that. Again, we want to say thank you for joining us for this episode of the Logos Connection Conversation That Matters. And if the Lord says the same, we'll see you again in July. God bless you, everyone, and have an incredible night on purpose.